better never ends. In health, in performance, no matter your starting point, you can always strive for better. My name's Charlie Goodchild, I'm your host, and this is the Better Never Ends podcast. We've made it our mission to share with you the expertise and wisdom of role models and leading experts in their field, teaching us about how we can be better, telling stories about their journey to better, and inspiring you to discover yours.
Today we welcome Dr. Steve James into the podcast room, and Steve is a longevity doctor, and we'll cover a bit about what that really means. It's certainly a subject I've become increasingly interested in, perhaps relatively early in what some of you might think is relevant. Many of you might be thinking longevity is about living longer, and that's something to worry about when you're older. And today's conversation hopefully brings a bit more urgency into that, and why it might be more important for you to be thinking about it at a younger age. So Steve has got lots of interesting points that we're going to be sharing today, but I think the most important place to start, Steve, as I bring you in here, is why do we need to be thinking about longevity, even for people who maybe are earlier in their adult life, so maybe like 20s, 30s, 40s, instead of what we would normally associate with someone who's trying to live longer, maybe 50s, 60s, 70s. So Steve, welcome. Tell us a bit about why we should be caring about longevity at this age.
So the factors that really drive longevity can be in some ways put together as metabolic health. And there's lots of ways of defining that. But if you've got good metabolic health now, you will not have the basis for cardiovascular disease, dementia, cancer, which is what you want to not have later. But you're also going to have optimal, or your best function, your best form, your best ability to do whatever you want to do now. So you're driving current health in order to also prevent later problems. So you get the reward now and the reward later.
And what is it about good health now that helps with future health?
It's really the same thing. So if one way of looking at metabolic health is to say it's about metabolism, it's about cellular function. So that's how do you get nutrients into your body? That's both what you ingest as well as your gut health. That's about how your body converts food into energy. So that's the mitochondria, the muscle, impact of insulin, fats in your body. And then there's how does the body perform, how do different cells perform specialized functions, your brain, your liver, other parts of your body, your heart, for example. And then there's how do you excrete all the problems, all the byproducts of metabolism. So if you don't do each of those steps well, you have problems. So if you don't take in enough nutrients, you've got problems all the way down the line. If you've got gut health problems, you might experience that in your stomach and your abdomen when you're eating food, but also you're not getting the right nutrients in. If you can't effectively convert energy or food into energy, so if you've got a problem with your mitochondria or low muscle, you're going to feel tired or just unable to do the things you want to do, or you'll do the things you want to do and you'll be exhausted. And people, you might find that as a teenager in your early 20s, you can get away with kind of everything. Those of us who've passed on a few decades remember that time here. But if you start to have children, for example, or you start to have a job that's busier and the amount of time to actually rest and recover starts to become limited, you start to see that balance shift. So having that ability for energy production is really important.
Yeah.
With a sort of specialized function of different cells, again, you won't notice much for a long period of time, but processes like hypertension developing, they start as a teenager. That process of fatty deposits in your arteries, that's starting really, really young, and it's not affecting you, but it's a gradual process. It's increasing, and you can't take away scar tissue. Yeah. So when the body's got through those different stages towards the disease process, when it's scarred, when it's broken down, when you've lost heart muscle or brain function, yeah, you can't just put those back in with a few supplements and starting a healthy lifestyle. Yeah. You want to stop that damage from happening, and you want to reverse things while you're still in a plastic state and not in a fixed state.
Yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there about the the fact that you don't notice it a lot of the time when you're younger, that there's potentially some other symptoms of that, which is that vitality that you might experience, that freshness in life, that energy, your fitness. But we probably don't associate that with problems in future decades. We just think, I'm got time in my hands, I'll fix that in the future, because it is hard work. It is difficult to sometimes make those big changes in your lifestyle, to exercise more, to eat healthier. But by the sounds of it, what you're saying is the signs to look out for when you're younger, that there's probably some stuff going on under the hood that we can't yet see, that may well be too late to change if you try and do that in your 50s, for example. So that, I think that really encapsulates it right there, is that we should be thinking about this now. Whatever decade you're in, it's now is the time to think about it. And the younger you start, the more complete your health will likely be. Tell us what got you into longevity then. You've told us why it's important, but why do you care?
Well, I had a background where I grew up as a child in a home where my mum talked a lot about food. You Are What You Eat was a book that was definitely bouncing around the house when I was a kid. So I would have had some sort of consciousness in that direction. I was then interested in mental health in some ways through the practice of Buddhism and meditation. But then as time went on, I started working as a consultant. I started seeing patients coming for cardiac surgery. I was an anaesthetist looking after those people. And I just saw that the vast majority of these problems these people were encountering were because of preventable problems. And then I switched into intensive care, and I walked around the intensive care ward, and I saw all these different presentations of people ending up needing in critical care with organ failure and many people dying. And again, I saw problems with metabolic health, with things that could be prevented. And then COVID came, and COVID was the most clear signal that if you've got bad metabolic health, you're much more susceptible to die from certain problems or have big consequences from things. And I took a little bit of a step back, and I think a year or two before, my father had been sick. He'd gone into hospital, the kind of situation that most critical care consultants think, oh no, I don't want that happening to my father. I know what that can lead to. And I felt the frailty of his life at that point. I felt that every time I said goodbye, there was this feeling, is this the last time I'm going to see him? Is this going to happen again? And this time he won't make it through. And I started thinking about his health and my mother's health, and thinking about, okay, I'm next to experience these things. And I started thinking, well, if I look at my parents and my grandparents, I'm probably going to live into my 90s. Yeah. That's a long period of time away from, let's say, retirement, or the time when I think I might be healthy. The average Brit has 10 years of healthy life expectancy after 65. That's not very long. If I'm looking at wanting to have 30 years of life, I don't want to have 10 years of healthy life and 20 years of limitation.
Yep.
So I started thinking, well, I've done quite a few things already to maintain good health. And I have this knowledge from sleep medicine, from nutrition, from exercise. Let's start to put all this together in a formal way and start to not just understand it, make sure I've applied it with myself, and start applying it with other people, with patients, with clients.
Yeah, it's what you're talking about there is the difference between lifespan and health span, and this was the first thing that grabbed my attention. Just that concept in itself.
Yeah,
the fact that sure, we've figured out in this society now that we live in that we can keep people alive for quite a long time, and our life expectancy now is 80s, 90s. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're healthy, and we can look around lots of people in that age bracket and see just what that looks like. And it tends to be, you're rattling as you move around, all the medication that you're on. You're quite often bedbound or seatbound, and there's a lot of people that need to come around and care for you, either family or paid for care. And I must admit, I agree with you. That's not the kind of life that I want to be living. And for 20 years, because that's really what you've just said, right? It's like you've got 10 years of good health after retirement, 20 years of limited health, and that scares the hell out of me. So that was the thing that grabbed my attention, is how do I make sure that's not me? And the more I read about it, the more I realize what you said in your opening statement, which is now is the time to start making those changes, or at least not just being frivolous with my health, but actually being a bit more mindful of it. And I'll still enjoy life, but I'll be a bit more mindful of what the impact is in the future. And there's a lovely paragraph within Peter Attia's Outlive right at the beginning of his book, where he talks about, when are we going to stop pulling people out the river at the bottom until we realize that we should be looking at the top of the river and finding out why they're falling in the first place. And it kind of really helped me understand that logic of, we need to help people live healthier when they're younger, not just solve the problems when they're older. And that way we're going to give much more chance of health span. And the crazy thing is, if we think about the healthcare costs of keeping people alive for 20 years when they're declining in health and function, that's really expensive. Whereas keeping people who don't need that level of care is way cheaper. So it sort of makes sense as a society that we should be looking at it to reduce costs, improve spending on other things that gives people better quality of life when they're younger, and not just trying to keep people alive when they're older. Yeah. So what are your thoughts around that, about kind of some of the more societal implications of what we're talking about here?
So if the average person is at 65 having 10 years of health span, they're not having 20 years of poor function after that, because the average person isn't living to be 95. So the average person in the UK is dying around 80. So they're probably having 10 years of healthy life and then 5 years of decreased function, more and more dependency. What's really interesting is to take a bit of a historical perspective and think about what lifespan was, so how long people live in the last century. And the key difference between then and now is not that we've done lots of things to really sort things out, it's that we've managed to stop people dying in childhood. So if you lived to be, let's say 25, 100 years ago, there was a good chance you'd make it to 75. Life expectancy has only really increased because a fifth of the population don't die before they're 20. So we haven't made such a big inroad into increasing lifespan like the numbers suggest we have. And like you allude to, what we've currently done is extended out lifespan, but we're not actually currently increasing the health span. Yeah. So people are kind of falling down their function curve, and then as they get towards the bottom, we're sort of able to keep them going. I remember a consultant in critical care who told me once, what we're doing is helping people who've fallen over the edge of a cliff and holding on to a thin branch. We're giving them a slightly thicker one. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. But personally, I want to focus now on stopping people jumping into the river.
Mm. Yeah. So then what are the main things, what are the main big blocks of things that people should be considering if we've grabbed their attention through this conversation, and they're thinking, all right then, go on then, what do I need to be doing now to help me in the future? What are the main things we should be looking out for?
So you could split that up and think about it in, say, 5 different sectors. One of those would be nutrition, gut health, what you're putting into your body. One would be exercise, movement, and it needs to be much wider than just gym exercise kind of thing. Yeah, flexibility, stability, all the things I know that you're keen on with people, but not just linear movement as the only way to be moving.
Well, let's just pause on that and maybe explain why we both agree on that. So I'm very aware of the importance of strength, of cardiovascular, and also of stability. So my belief is of stability being something that helps reduce falls prevention in older people. It's also an injury prevention tool as well, injury risk reduction. So tell us some interesting stuff around falls then. Why do we want to limit falls when people get older? Why is that so catastrophic?
Well, falls, like injury, which often lead to falls, periods of ill health, surgery, interventions like this, lockdown, they lead to sudden drops in people's function. Now, when you're young and healthy, you get that drop in function. When you're sick for a while, you bounce back up to where you were before. But as your function starts to get worse and worse as you get older, those little drops in function are very rarely recovered back to where you were before. So they lead to a real shortening of your health span. So that's quite important from that side. And once you've, for example, had an injury, you're then much more likely to not go and be active. So then you lose the benefit of those things. So the stability side, the flexibility side is really important for the maintenance and the consistency of what you're doing. And also, you have to think about what it is you want to do when you get older. So one of the things that is a central idea for myself is I've got family in 3 countries. So I'm often traveling. Work's been in a couple of countries, kids, parents, my wife, different locations. I can't see them all suddenly ending up in the same place. I've got to fly. I've got to fly basically for the rest of my life. That means I want to fly when I'm 95. I don't want someone having to be there with me. I mean, I love company. I don't mind taking help here, but I also want to be able to do it on my own. So I want to be able to put my carry-on luggage in the overhead compartment on the airplane at 95.
And climb stairs.
And climb the stairs and do all this thing.
Yeah.
And it's completely possible. Medicine, society, lots of things are selling us a really dirty story, which is age-related decline. Yeah. If you see people who are 95 and strong and bright and well, they're not a miracle. They are aging without disease.
They've done the work.
They've done the work usually, yeah. They've maintained all their social contacts. They've had purpose. They've eaten well. They've, followed in many ways some sort of ancestral pattern where they were still involved with light, community, all the contrasts that I think are really vital for stimulating health, yeah. And they're healthy. And yet I see, CT scans of people's brains on a daily basis, and the changes are reported as age-related change, yeah, normal age-related change. Just because something happens often in society as we get older doesn't mean it's inevitable. Yeah. So you don't need to end up with a shriveled brain at 65 or 70 and everyone kind of say, well, that's just aging. Don't believe that. It's not true. Yeah. It just happens commonly, but you can maintain all your function and actually get a bit wiser on the process too. Yeah. Enjoy more.
It sounds like there's a choice here, that people have a choice to make at varying stages in their life as to how they continue to live. And look, I understand the way these things work out, about how people can lose a lot of confidence. They might have an injury, they might lose someone in their life, and that can be quite a big life event that can stop things in their tracks. And let's say, for example, an injury, they have a period of rest and then they need to get back moving again, but then it hurts and they struggle to get back moving again. And this is, physio in a nutshell, is we give people the confidence to get moving again and a plan that helps them back to where they were. But if they don't have that access, or they choose not to, or they're too scared, the downward spiral is really quite alarming when people get older, right? We've covered that a bit already. And it's really hard to get back up that spiral. So what we're talking about here is try not to go down that downward spiral. Keep yourself, whatever opportunity you have, keep yourself in a place where you maintain, because if you don't use it, you lose it. And that happens faster and faster the older you get, and it becomes harder and harder to get back the older you get. So it's a real reminder for people that there is choice. There are choices you have. And if you can't solve the problem, there's probably someone out there that can help you solve the problem to get you back to the health that you need to be in order to get older.
It's very true. But what I would also say is that the body's really quite forgiving. And don't think that just because you didn't take that first opportunity to get yourself back or to maintain your health, that you can't come back. Yeah. You can come back from quite incredible states of decline and dysfunction. And I used the word plastic before. So plastic doesn't mean something, modern plastic material. It means changeable, yeah, that something can change. And so until you've got up to that sort of scarring phase, you can usually reverse most of the process. Yeah. So, excess weight, poor muscle function, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lots of things that, as long as they haven't been around for really a long, long time, you can wind your way back on lots of those things. Choice is really important, yeah? Understanding, like you said, having the confidence to make the choice. A lot of people don't have that. And that's the danger when society, public health goes in and wants to do things for everybody is they sit back and think, well, my doctor will let me know if there's a problem. The government will tell me what to do. If these things are available, if these are the choices, that's what's kind of okay, yeah? But if you give away your power to other people, you don't have power. And you don't have the ability to choose.
Yeah.
And that is so important.
And this is a system that's designed to pull people out of the river at the bottom. So if we're relying on that system to tell us when we need to do something, then we're again missing the point of our future health. So this is where, again, I think people need the knowledge and people need to see it from a different perspective from the top of that river. And I think there's such a great metaphor for that.
Don't you think Peter Attia was being a bit optimistic with the idea that we pull people out of the river? I think we're throwing them floats.
I think, yeah, I think that's even better because it's true. We really seem to be stuck in that mindset as well. It's like, let's spend more and more money on solving end of life problems and like chronic problems that are, it's the wrong stage.
Yeah.
You know, we should be investing on health in the healthy, really, more so. I'm not saying we stop doing what we're doing, but
very much agree.
The investment should be coming through with people when they have the ability to really maintain where they are, rather than allowing them to decline to such a level that, you know, you see it day in, day out in intensive care, right? That's the stuff that's really difficult.
Very much agree, but was really excited to start working with a stroke team in North London. So there they've been talking with the CCG, so the Care Commissioning Group, and they don't want to spend more money on the next MRI. They actually want to change the health perspective that people have so that they are looking towards healthy interventions. So we're putting together a metabolic health program for people who've had stroke so that we can try to educate them on what determines metabolic health, because that determines stroke as much as it determines cardiovascular disease. And that's everything from circadian rhythm and sleep, which gets really disrupted if you've had a stroke, to muscle mass, so you're going to prevent falls. So if you've got a stroke, let's see how easy it is to balance and walk. Again, you need muscle mass, you need training, nutrition. So if you're not getting the right things in, your brain's not going to do well. Brain problems, stroke. It's all there. It's all linked together. And metabolic health is the foundation for all these problems.
So there is some optimism going on within our current systems, and there are some people out there that are doing good work.
There are definitely people out there doing good work. And you also need, as a healthcare practitioner, you've done this, you need to start to do what you think is the right thing to do. And you need to stand up, say, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, this works, or I even just want to try doing things this way. You can deliver care much better as a healthcare practitioner when you're doing what you really feel is the right thing to do. And that gives the opportunity to break ground and to develop new services.
Yeah, it's very hard to tell people what to do if you're not doing that thing, practice what you preach and all that.
It's not effective.
We're never perfect. No one is, but I think it helps if you're living it. If you're living and breathing that world, then you could talk much more passionately and with much better understanding, and people will just give you a bit more respect for it, I believe. We covered briefly on nutrition, we got to exercise and movement, and we paused on stability to talk a bit about the importance of that. But there's a couple of big things within movement that we have to talk about here, which is cardiovascular health and muscle health. Mm-hmm. So feel free, you choose whichever one you want to choose first. What do you want to speak about first?
Well, for me, a lot of it comes down to VO2, so oxygen uptake, commonly seen as VO2 max, but VO2 is also the measurement that you make at your anaerobic threshold. So how much oxygen can you consume? How much power can you put out? And that involves your respiratory health, that involves your cardiovascular health, that involves your autonomic nervous system control, that involves mitochondrial health, and that involves muscle mass. Yeah. So there's a whole chain there of delivering oxygen, burning oxygen, creating ATP in movement, and the removal of carbon dioxide going back. Now, if we just take muscle health first of all, muscle, I think, is probably the most underappreciated organ in the body. Yeah,
very nice.
It's an organ. It's an endocrine organ. It's not just going up and down. For example, it's like a reservoir. So if you take in protein, it gets broken down into amino acids, and your muscle will store those amino acids and deliver them as you need them during the day. Similarly, if you eat a lot of carbohydrate and you eat a lot of glucose, then that glucose gets distributed to the muscle cells, and it doesn't spike your blood sugar, and so your blood sugar will stay nice and stable. So if you see a bodybuilder, they can eat 300 grams of fast carbohydrate in a meal, and their blood sugar doesn't budge.
Yeah, because they just sponge it all up in the muscle.
Yeah, and then deliver it right down. So it's a buffer. It's meant to be there to control those things. So biggest, most underappreciated organ in the body, muscle. Yeah. Okay, it really is the biggest. It's a huge volume.
And I love some of the data around grip strength and how powerful that is as a predictor for our future health, mortality, for cardiovascular disease. Initially, it seems crazy, right? That muscle, this contractile organ, as we're going to call it, quite rightly so, it has some form of link to our overall health. But then actually, when we consider what people on the brink of death actually look like, they have really low muscle mass. And then you can start to understand why it's so important to maintain it in a way. But can you give us your understanding around grip strength, muscle mass, and future health?
Okay, so grip strength is a marker, I think, of overall muscle strength. You can look at muscle strength, you can look at muscle volume, and you can look at muscle sort of health, so fat inside of it. Muscle strength is the optimal in many ways, and fatty muscle is the worst scenario to find. I don't think that taking a grip trainer and using a grip trainer all the time and doing nothing else is going to make you live longer. So it's a marker of your overall...
Like a proxy marker, isn't it?
It's a proxy marker, yeah. So it's a marker of the overall function of what's going on. But, you can see the scenarios very easily. As you get a little bit older, you start to fall, can you grab something on the way down? Yeah. I had a client who recently shared that sort of story with me. She was in the street. She'd somehow clipped her foot on some paving stones, went to fall over, and just was able to grab something and steady herself. And she said, I know that I couldn't have done that a few months ago. Yeah. And you just see how you can offset that event, like I said earlier, that leads to the drop-in function. So that's, I think, really one aspect of it. The other aspect is the metabolic health of healthy muscle. So if you've got healthy muscle, the chances are you've offset the chance that you've got metabolic dysfunction. So you're much more likely to have healthy lipid levels, you're much more likely to have less inflammation, you're much more likely to have better glucose control, so have less insulin resistance. So those things go together. More muscle mass, more metabolic health, usually.
Yeah, I even read somewhere that it's a better marker than blood pressure for our overall future health, which...
Do you know why we measure blood pressure?
Tell me.
Because it's easy to measure.
Okay.
Yeah, and we found out that it is a predictor. Yeah. But, for example, in hospital, it'd be much better to measure flow, but flow is really hard to measure. Yeah. So we do measure some things because we can.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned actually that strength then is your preferred measure. Why is that better than muscle mass?
So you can have muscle mass that isn't very effective. You can have muscle that's infiltrated with fat, and really strong muscle seems to predict outcomes better than just muscle bulk. Muscle bulk in general will tell you, so if you're in the upper end of the ranges, then more muscle tends to be healthy, tends to be well functioning. But actually strength itself is probably the most important.
And how easy, as we get older, it is harder to put on muscle mass. I think most people understand that. They understand that they're more likely to lose it. But as you said earlier, age-related changes, does that mean that we have to lose muscle? Can you maintain muscle across 2, 3 decades in your later life?
Usually not.
Yeah.
Usually not. So there will be some change. But if you look at what percentage of it is absolutely determined by age and what percentage of it is determined by the activity level that you hold on to, Few people who go to the gym for their whole life end up weak because age-related decline has made that happen. So there's going to be a small percentage that's going to change each year. And so the figures that we look at for muscle mass change and VO2 max change, those are based on the population. They're not based on people who are maintaining exercise levels. So I reckon it's probably half or a third of that change is actually age-related. So if you see people who are in the gym year on year, they know it's hard to maintain the same level of peak performance when they're 50 compared when they're 30, even if they maintain their effort. So we do see there's some difference, but the vast majority it is down to non-use.
Yeah, and on the other side of that conversation, it's as much as even when you're doing the best work possible, you will still lose a little bit. When you're doing the best work possible, that lifelong commitment to maintaining muscle health seems to be that's why I believe grip strength is such a great marker, because you can't really cheat that test. Blood physiology can be changed relatively quickly with some dietary changes. We're talking about over the course of months and years perhaps, but you can't quickly cram in a lifetime's worth of muscle related activity. So perhaps that's why it's sometimes outperforms some of these other markers, because it's that test you can't cheat for. It's
but I don't think the majority of people, I know you can hack some tests, but I think when we see it as a marker for society, it is simply reflecting many, many important things and going on.
So is there anything extra on cardiovascular health that we should cover here? We mentioned about VO2 max being a marker of that, which includes multiple factors, multiple processes within the body. Anything else that we should be considering here?
I don't think we can skip the discussion of lipoproteins and cholesterol, can we?
No.
So there's some interesting developments that have gone on there in the last few years. So I think one of the first things to understand is that within our body we have these lipoproteins. They're like boats that carry around cholesterol and triglycerides, and some of those are called LDL and some of those are called HDL, and there's some other versions like VLDL and ILDL. Each one of those has either what's called an ApoB molecule on it or an ApoA. Okay, so the VLDL, the ILDL, and the LDL all have this ApoA on, and the HDL has an ApoB, and the HDL has an ApoA on it. So normally when you get your cholesterol measured at the GP or a normal test, you'll get an LDL-C, and that's a concentration measurement. Really, it's a volume measurement. It's if you stack together all your LDLs in your body, what's the volume of all those together? Now, volume of LDL is a rough marker of how many LDL particles you've got. And what we now understand is it's the number of LDL particles that you've got that are much more important than the actual amount. Now, if you've got more, you might well have more volume, you might well have more individual particles. But what we also know is that it's the smaller particles that tend to cause the problems. They tend to get stuck within the proteoglycan area of the intima within your artery, and that's what causes the problem. So if you want to know about how your cholesterol is important, what you need to do is get an ApoB and ideally an ApoA measurement, look at the ratio of those two, then take into account how much what we call LP little a, which is another kind of particle that's in your blood that carries another lipoprotein. It tends to be genetically determined, but it's seen to be much more associated with atherosclerosis, so the process of developing coronary artery disease in particular, and markers like small LDL and oxidized LDL. So when those things are all taken into account, you can make a much more wide, much more accurately based picture. I draw a comparison between LDL and BMI. So within a high BMI, so obesity is defined as a BMI over 30, yeah? But a lot of people who have got a BMI of 30 are not sick or unwell if they've got a high muscle mass. Yeah. So BMI grabs a lot of people who've got a lot of problems, but maybe 20% or so people within that group won't have the problems that are associated with the high BMI. Similarly, people with a lower BMI, about 20% of those will have excess visceral fat and low muscle mass. They'll have a low BMI, but they'll have the metabolic health problems. So it's a cheap and easy, reasonable assessment. But if you want to get more accurate, you need to know your ApoB and your ApoA. And the ratio of those two is probably the best we can find. Then we got another question, which is all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality. Now, we're fairly confident that the more ApoB particles you have, the more of those particles, especially the small ones, will get stuck within your artery wall and will cause the problems of cardiovascular disease. So the trend is to just say, let's get lower. Now, the traditional models are based on a 10-year risk, like the Q risk score. And they say, well, until your risk becomes 10%, we won't do anything much about it. Your 10-year risk greater than 10%, that's when doctors now say, we should give you a statin, we should do this, we should do that. Yeah,
Because you're nowhere near the bottom of the river.
Because you already jumped in. Yeah, you maybe haven't hit the water.
Yeah.
But why start there? So there's this causal benefit model that's out, which is talking about starting as soon as you know there's a problem. Okay. Now I can agree with it that far. Lowering your ApoB to a very low level may really reduce your chance of cardiovascular disease, but does it affect other diseases other than cardiovascular disease? So if we look at the mortality outcomes from big population studies, like the Amoris study from Sweden, for example, that looked at people mainly before statins were actually available or widely available, there we can see that people who've got a very low ApoB actually have a worse outcome than people who have a more moderately low level. And then it shoots up from there. So the majority of the population are already in the area where the highness of the value is causing cardiovascular disease. But if you were to lower everybody, you'd end up with more deaths from something.
So there's like a J-shaped curve.
That's right, it's a J-shape. Yeah. So what we've got to work out, and we don't really know what the answer is to this yet, is if you lower LDL and you lower ApoB, same sort of scenario, are you causing less cardiovascular disease but more other problems? Because we need cholesterol, we need those things for other things in our body. And the studies have shown equivocal outcomes. So sometimes lowering mortality is sometimes increasing all-cause mortality. Now, I'm not really a fussy man when it comes to whether I die from cardiovascular disease or something else. Yeah, I'm interested in all-cause mortality. And when you get advised to go onto a medication, you really want to think about all-cause mortality.
Is that what we're talking about here? We're strictly talking about medication to reduce cholesterol, LDL, ApoB. Is that the main?
Well, that's the thing I think a lot of people are concerned about. That's the question they're facing with their doctors. That's the question that, their partners or their parents have started to take a statin. Is it a good idea? So that's one way. And that's, the drugs, we've got a whole range of different drugs now that can lower ApoB or LDL. But is that what we want? Personally, I'm a little more inclined to think that the body has got a good idea about what it's doing. And if I'm not, if I'm giving it the right stimulus and giving it the right rest and the right opportunity to cleanse itself, I think I'll get the best out of it possible. I'm not yet inclined to think that pushing it very hard in a certain unphysiological direction is going to give me a long-term benefit. That might be, but I don't think the data's there to say it yet.
Yeah, because I think the pendulum's swinging from side to side on statins over the past sort of few decades, I guess, in a way, hasn't it? So whenever statins came in, everyone, all of a sudden, it's like, everyone needs statins to reduce cholesterol because cholesterol is this bad thing. Then we understand LDL versus HDL, and then now we're understanding ApoB, ApoA, and LP(a). There's all these extra bits that's helping us understand these things in a bit more detail. And now we're sort of stuck in the middle somewhere of, hang on a minute, which direction do we want to be going? And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that do still support statins in certain populations. And I know that they're still very widely prescribed and probably save lives for the right people.
Yeah, the general medical view is very much still that statins are good. Yeah. There's some questions about which risk score system we're going to use. So as the risk scores get better, there's a suggestion that there won't be so much reliance on LDL. That's the new PREVENT score. But then if you go into this causal benefit model, you would just say, bring it right down because you can. Yeah. Now, what that doesn't take into account is the fact that there are significant negative side effects for some people with statins. Yeah. So if you've already got cardiovascular disease and you take a statin, it's going to reduce your chance of dying. It doesn't reduce your chance of dying if you haven't already got cardiovascular disease. It does reduce your chance of dying if you've already got cardiovascular disease. But it's also going to give you a 1 in 20 chance of developing type 2 diabetes over 5 years. And then there's the muscle pain issue and the tolerance for people. So again, you need to individualize and you need to have someone think about these things. And I think that's why people are unhappy with any kind of cookie cutter treatment, because they know that they're an individual. They're not the average person from a study. Yeah. I don't think that, I think, moving towards evidence-based medicine has taken us away from individualizing and clinical experience to an extent. And I think we should recognize that.
I think we actually get a bit too obsessed with the evidence-based medicine as being research heavy, when actually what the real model says is that it's just as much about patient beliefs, expectations, experience of the clinician combined with the available literature, and depends on the problem at hand as to which one of those we lean on the most. But really it's a combination of all those three things, which is genuine evidence-based medicine.
Absolutely. So that's what evidence-based medicine was supposed to be. But it's become much more reliant on, let's say, data. That data tends to come from randomized controlled trials, or at least it tends to come. Randomized controlled trials are seen as the optimal way to gain that data, and they are an excellent way of looking at individual input and whether that thing makes a difference or not. But we are complex biological systems.
Yeah, and we very rarely have one change going on in our life.
It's very rare that one extra thing is going to make a bit of a difference. So it's quite impressive when one extra drug or one extra molecule makes a difference. The problem with that is that the biggest factors in long-term health cannot be assessed in randomized controlled trials. Yeah. You cannot assess nutrition over 30 years and keep two groups of people with totally different diets alongside each other and everything else the same. You can't do it.
Too many variables.
So you need to accept that.
So we're talking about the ultimate medication here, and that's lifestyle. So we've said lifestyle, Absolutely. One of them being nutrition, the other one is exercise, and just take us through some of the other lifestyle factors that are important, and certainly from the impact they have on our health, but also on how you might measure them, perhaps.
Okay, so sleep, I think, is the next biggest thing to mention, and I like to combine it with rest, so that we understand that sort of whole sleep, rest, recovery, and the elimination of waste products from our brain that happens in that time. Growth happens from stimulus, rest, and adaptation. Yeah, it doesn't just happen from stimulus. Yep. So our bodies are intelligent. They get stressed or challenged in a certain way. They get usually damaged or exhausted in the process of coping. So muscle fibers get damaged. There's more muscle fiber turnover because the signal is there. That happens during the rest period, not during the time you're actually in the gym. And then from there, you have the adaptation to be more capable going forwards. That's true across a lot of things. I mentioned this idea of contrasts before. Yeah. So you can see there are lots of different contrasts that the body responds to. So when you push your body outside of its comfort zone, that's when the real growth, the real development occurs. So what kind of parameters can we see for our comfort zone? So we can see hot and cold. So if you're always in a temperature regulated environment, you're used to that temperature regulated environment, your body's not used to, it's not trained in cold and heat. Yeah. So saunas, heat exposure in different forms, cold exposure, ice baths, all that sort of thing. That's taking on the temperature spectrum. Yeah? And there's a lot to gain when you get to the edges, when you push the boundaries. That's when the body says, whoa, I've got to do something here, something's going on. Yeah. Then you've got community and solitude. Yeah. So spending time together with other people, it's really stimulating for our nervous system, but spending time alone is also, it's reflective. It's another process. It requires a different kind of activity. You've got light and dark. You've got fed and fasted. You've got strong, heavy, moving heavy things and moving and controlling light things. And if you look at this, then you get this sort of playful concept of your body and start to see, oh, if I go out to this edge, there's this, and if I come back to this, it's that. Yeah. Yeah. And then those edges are the stresses. Yeah. And when you're pushed into those stresses without choice and continuously, it's chronic. And when you push into those boundaries on your own, through your own choice, and you come back again, that's an acute stressor which leads to growth.
Yeah, I love that, because that seems to really blend with what I've heard people talk about regarding our modern lives and how comfortable our modern lives can really be. How we can have air conditioning and central heating that helps to keep us in the perfect temperature so that we're not uncomfortable. How we can have all these electronic mechanical aids that make life easy for us. So we don't have to lift things up. We don't have to climb stairs. We can just have moving stairs that just take us up, lifts that just move us up to floors. We can have all sorts of things. We can have computers that do all the brain work for us and calculators. So life can be incredibly easy for us if we want it to be. And ultimately that is quite enjoyable in the short term, to have life nice and easy. But what we know about doing hard things in the short term is it makes our long term really easy. Whereas if we do easy things in the short term, it's likely that our long term is going to be super hard. So that's what you're saying about there, is we should be getting uncomfortable on a regular basis, not chronically. I like that differentiation, not chronically, but just the sweet spot where we take ourselves out of the comfort zone and then recover from it. Go again somewhere else. What else makes us uncomfortable? Let's do that. Bring us back into comfort again. So it's just this teasing of the system and this constant pushing the boundaries, but coming back to rest and recovery.
Find the edge. Find the place where it starts to be a different experience for you.
And there's another lovely saying that I say to my clients all the time, is that you only benefit from the training that you recover from. And it's almost like you could say that with the hot and cold. You only benefit from the heat that you recover from. You only benefit from the cold that you recover from. I've not really thought of it like that, but it just came to me there that we really have to be thinking of recovery just as much as the stimulus itself, because if we don't, it becomes chronic, and therefore it becomes the opposite of beneficial to our system.
Yeah, there are stimuluses that work without you noticing. So, for example, keeping your brain active in your job doesn't need to be particularly stressful, but not having that job takes away a stimulus and takes away some brain function. If you take away sight and hearing, then you're more likely to develop cognitive dysfunction. So you wouldn't necessarily have felt that you needed to recover from having sight and hearing on a daily basis. You can do certain things without that problem. Zone 2 training, for example, it should probably be that you don't feel the next day that you've done Zone 2 before, because you should be working at a level that's not producing large amounts of lactate that you can't cope with at the time. You're always producing lots of lactate, by the way, but it's the amount, whether you can cope with the amount that you're producing, and whether you've got an oxygen debt and you have to deal with that later on.
You mentioned something else as well about solitude, and just tell us a bit about the difference between solitude and loneliness, because loneliness is incredibly dangerous and harmful for us.
Yeah.
Whereas solitude, you spoke of it as a positive. So what's the difference?
I suppose that's, again, the difference between whether you choose it or you don't choose it, right? Going into a space where you have the opportunity to be on your own, to have also less stimulus for a period of time. Yeah. So I'm thinking of solitude, where you're maybe a bit more in nature, or you're sitting meditating, or you're somewhere where you're not overly stimulated as well. And then when in many ways what retreat means, to go back from the stimulus of the normal daily life. And in that environment, you can have this internal emotional rest and adaptation, like a muscle has a rest. Yeah, your brain and your functioning and your assessment and all your kind of safety monitors and vigilance and all these things, they can go away for a little bit, because we have different brain circuits that are protecting other areas of our brain. There's lots of ways of looking at that with the internal family systems and Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory about how our brain protects with certain activities because there are other layers that we're not comfortable with right now because of things that have happened in the past. So if you can find tools that allow you to drop certain neural circuits, you can get in and find something else. There are techniques that you can use for people who've got dissociative seizures, for example, whereby you get them to do something like put their hand into a bowl of cold ice water, and that activates one part of their brain, and it means that the part of the brain that's starting to lead to the dissociative seizure starts to calm down. Yeah. So sometimes you can play with that balance of things. Now, another thing I'd like to say is, you mentioned about doing the sort of the hard work, if you like, in order to get the benefit later. But actually, with pretty much everything that you do that has a survival benefit from an ancestral point of view, you feel good about doing. And that's smart, because the brain, our system, our genetics have geared us to appreciate doing things that help us to survive. I was having a conversation with one of my sons a few months back, and I going to talk to him about the sort of concept of going out on the hunt and the different activities that are involved in that, and then sort of bringing the food back. And he offered me a little gem when he said that he'd actually heard about that in school and been talking about it. And he said, first of all, you rest and you observe the animal in nature, and you observe what's going on, the patterns around you. And that was just like a total blessing when I heard him say that, because we often look for the stimulus and reward. We don't see that rest itself gives us a reward in our brain. So when we rest and observe in nature, that's one of the best things you can do for your mental health, for your mood, especially if you're in a green environment or a blue environment. So, the seas, the lakes, the forests. Also, seeing the horizon tells you that you're safe, because you can see a lot of what's going on around you. That helps your nervous system. So if you want to do something really good for yourself, you can just go into nature and sit still and just observe what's going on around you. Yeah. Just see the patterns that are there, and then you go and do your stressor event. Yeah.
Well, these effects are so powerful that even just looking at pictures can actually do the same thing, which I find absolutely crazy, really. I mean, it's not, I wouldn't recommend it, but just looking at pictures could give you the same mental, or at least a mental health benefit.
Well, why should our brain have learnt to distinguish between a picture of the forest and the actual view of the forest in reality?
Yeah. The other part, and I'll link my own family version of what you've just said. My wife, who was recently converted into running, and she said, who'd have thought it, after all, that exercise does make me feel better? So I think that as much as all the evidence compels us, and we understand that exercise is good for us and it's good for our mental health, she had her own lived experience, which I think some people, obviously in the end, becomes incredibly powerful, that it can help you feel a lot better. And I get this craving often of, like, when I'm out for a run, to just try and get off the urban streets and try and find green space, even if it's just to run through a very short park. So there's got to be something, and I don't notice myself doing it, but I get there and I'm now in green space, and I'm subconsciously planning my route around the green space.
Yeah, I noticed that as sort of search for green a few years ago, It's what led me to move out of London a while back. I noticed that on the weekend I was searching green and trying to plan how to get to green.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden now we're speaking about this, it makes complete sense, doesn't it? So then we haven't fully covered sleep, I don't believe. So we've said that recovery and rest is very important, and about why that's important, getting the stimulus and the rest right. Mm-hmm. What about
what's good sleep?
Yeah, what is good sleep?
Okay, yeah. So the best marker of good sleep is waking up feeling refreshed. Don't worry about what your Oura Ring says or Garmin or something else. Yeah, if you wake up feeling refreshed, that's much more accurate that you've had sufficient amount of sleep. Trackers can be useful. Yeah, definitely kinds of health trackers that we have, but they're often a distraction. It's not that common that more information leads to healthier behavior. Yeah. So one idea is to get a coach or a friend to interpret your data and remind you or tell you about what things you might need to do, or to use trackers at times when you're under particular stress or you're going through a particular training program. Really, they're about learning to tune into your body.
Yes.
And have that as a mirror. Don't have that as the actual, source. Don't rely upon it as the source of what's going on. Your body tells you these things.
I completely agree.
Now, the different ways of tracking sleep, they are trend markers. They're not absolute markers. So if you see your deep sleep is going up or going down, for example, then that's probably happening, but the actual absolute measurement is not accurate. So if you see your value is different from somebody else's, it doesn't mean that your deep sleep is insufficient. Okay. Other important things in sleep. Well, I was definitely in that crowd that said, I'll sleep when I retire. I definitely said that a few times, or when I'm older. I thought you could just get away with it if you just pushed yourself hard. Biggest shift in my overall health was definitely when I gave myself enough opportunity to sleep. And I just said, okay, I stopped doing this 5.5 to 6 hours a night business. And guess what happened? My memory improved, my mood improved, my desire to exercise and do other things all got so much better. It was the simplest thing. I'd even done a sleep study in the US. A friend runs a sleep lab in Chicago. I was starting to wonder if I was getting narcolepsy because I'd fall asleep so quickly. Typical doctor, couldn't diagnose himself. And I was lying there in this sleep lab, all wired up, and thinking to myself, this is so awkward. I was staying awake so much longer than normal. And I was thinking, I must tell them in the morning this is quite abnormal. Yeah? So I told my friend the next morning, and he looked at me with this kind of perplexed look, and it said, but it only took you a minute to go to sleep. So my delayed going to sleep was 1 minute. Yeah? Actually, having more or less than 5 minutes before you actually fall asleep is generally considered a good sign of sleep deprivation. So I was really sleep deprived. And that was always a problem for me when I did night shifts as a doctor, when I was in the hospital doing night shifts, because I would go into my night shifts really behind on sleep. And then you have 3 or 4 nights of disrupted sleep and trying to catch a few more hours when you get home. And then, of course, I was groggy and I was moody and my brain was like on this yes-no survival mode. Yeah. So I'm sorry to everybody I met from when I was doing night shifts afterwards and I was grumpy. But I had sleep deprived myself.
I remember the same experience when I was, when both of our kids were young, having a year or so of poor quality sleep, and just my memory of those years is very hazy and I don't really have much clarity about it, which is a shame because it's a magical time. You've got new kids, but it was really strange to sort of come out of that cloud when you suddenly realize you've had a few consecutive nights sleep. You go, wow, I've got this clarity of thought back again, and you start remembering extra details. So yeah, I think that we often kid ourselves of saying we're coping, and the brain has a very clever way of sort of kidding us that we are coping. But once we get more sleep, we realize quite how sleep deprived we were and how different life can be when we get it.
Yeah.
We've spoken a fair bit here about the mind-body connection, and we've covered it sort of gradually as we've gone through these topics. But I find it quite unusual that a doctor is so comfortable to speak about that. So tell us a bit more about mind and body, and perhaps that might lead us into stress, because it's probably the thing we haven't covered in much detail yet.
Yeah. So what's my background in that? Well, I became interested in meditation when I was 19. I started a charity in the UK teaching meditation, and that was a big focus in my life for 20 or 30 years. I studied stress biology at university, was interested in the interaction in addiction medicine and cortisol and how that works, the sort of play, and how we can have these chronic stresses and these acute stresses and challenges. And then I suppose really with the sort of meditation the whole time in the background, and seeing that, mind sets up the things that you say, which then tend to set up the things that you do, and then the things that you do lead to the health outcomes that you have. I'd always sort of seen that interplay with things quite a lot. And when I ran this exercise intolerance clinic looking at patients with fatigue, what I found was that you could develop a good relationship with the patient in that single session, but you couldn't help people to really change from seeing somebody on one consultation. And that's why I then went and worked with Gabor Mate and did his training program in psychotherapy, so that I could feel comfortable sitting with people, take them to somewhere where they get a discovery, where they understand something else about themselves, and then seeing how that fits in, how intelligently the body shows us things. So we can use aches and pains and problems in our body to allow ourselves to recognize issues that are going on subconsciously, not necessarily to say that they're exactly the same thing, but they allow us to tune in to what's going on. And that tuning in and recognition of what's going on is really powerful. It's really exciting.
You mentioned this with the wearable tech, and I agree with you. I use a Whoop and I use a Garmin for my training, so I've got a couple of different variations, and I find data interesting, perhaps just as much about me learning about the human body in general rather than necessarily about me. But I think what it helps me do is it helps me tune in to that, and that's what you're saying here about the mind-body connection, is that's why it seems to be so valuable for you, is that you can help people tune into themselves in a more accurate way. And what I find so rare is that actually you're talking like a coach. You're talking like you're coaching people, working with people, where normally a doctor will have all the information and perhaps give that information, consult, tell the person what it is they need to do in order to solve their problem and fix their problem. You're actually saying, I want to find out how to work with people so they can help themselves. That seems to be the thing that's jumped out at me in the conversation, that difference between consulting, coaching. Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, I suppose it is. I think, I didn't look at it from that perspective before. I've just been looking at what works and what do I enjoy doing. I want to work in a way that feels really good for me, because that's where I can do the most for other people. Being authentic, being in the middle, knowing about yourself, recognizing your strengths and weaknesses, working with that, picking the way you want to come out into the world and show that, and then trying to see where's the best setting for that. I think that's an important process for being satisfied and enjoying life. And I know that single consultations tend to leave people in a kind of semi-shocked state, and that sort of threshold experience can be very powerful. But if you just deliver that and then nothing else, it's not very effective. People don't really make change. So patterns have occurred for a long period of time, and you need a reasonable period of time working with somebody in order to get them to help them make those changes.
And one of those changes and certainly common factors within our modern life is stress. And let's be clear, we're talking about excess stress beyond the capacity of the person to cope. So what's your message, or what's your way of working with people who are clearly having too much stress in their life?
So a lot of people who've got too much stress in their life can't cut out that stress, or they don't want to cut out that stress. There are benefits associated with that stress. Let's say a busy job. Yeah. the more stress you've got in life, I think the more active recovery you need to balance that. So that doesn't mean that you need more time running on the weekend necessarily, but you need really effective and often actively chosen rest periods. Yeah. So if you're going to push and push and push on the system, you've got to give it the chance to recover. You've got to supply all the right nutrients it needs. You've got to give the signals to your brain to say, cut the stress is off, come down, it's safe. Yeah. And learning how to do that is something that not a lot of people talk about. We talk about stopping that stress. Yeah. But also once you learn how to shift, yeah, and this shifting is quite an interesting concept. So shifting between parasympathetic and sympathetic states, even being able to shift yourself out of parasympathetic into sympathetic and back down to parasympathetic again. This having familiarity with the control, up and down, this is really vital for people so that you come home and can switch off and go into a parasympathetic rest and digest state. In the mornings, for example, one of the things that I'm trying to be conscious of at the moment is that I don't just wake up and start to use my phone, that I rest in this period of having woken up but not really feeling like getting out of bed and enjoying that state for a while and saying, okay, my body is transitioning, it's waking up, different hormones are coming on board, the light's coming to my eyes, I might move my body a little bit, and then I might get out of bed and start some sort of gentle movement or something like this, So it's being conscious of this graduation between parasympathetic and sympathetic state and sympathetic back down to parasympathetic, If you can move easily, you've got much more control.
So again, sounding like being much more introspective and much more aware of your own body's processes again, rather than the artificial modern stimuli to actually be at peace with that. I certainly get that. That takes me a while to get going first thing in the morning, and that haze that's coming over me, and I'm certainly not a morning person by choice. So I much prefer the evening. I feel much more energized. So that sounds like you're learning how to accept those and almost await the energy that will come with the morning. Inevitably we will have those hormones that kick in. That's really lovely. You also mentioned there about you only benefit from the stress that you recover from. That's sure you can have stress, and a lot of people will be very, very energized and get a lot of positives out of having a stressed life, provided they have the time to recover from it. I think that's a really lovely caveat there. So we're reaching the end of the episode, but this is now a space for you to cover anything that we've not yet spoken about that you think is really important for this conversation.
I think one thing that's really important is the search for silver bullets, both within medicine and within the alternative for healthcare field. People think that one medication is going to solve the problem, that one supplement is going to solve the problem, that one new practice is going to solve the problem. We are complex systems. We are beautiful and intelligent systems. We're way more intelligent than we even know about. I remember being blown out of my mind when I did dissection class the first time in medical school and just understood how complex and beautiful the arm is, And that's just one of the simplest things. We're really intelligent. So when we look into why we behave the way we behave, it's smart, but it's complex. So just trying to look for simple solutions and hunting around and worrying about one factor, that's not very powerful. The only individual factor that's powerful, I would say, was the empowerment of the individual. So that's something that I think is really important.
Well, on that note, I would say the thing that that I wanted to express actually is to be kind to yourself. The lives we choose to live are often driven by a part of us, and look, this is influenced by a book I've been reading recently, The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters, and it's about this subconscious part of our brain that is very much geared up towards survival, and for good reasons. It's helped us to get to where we are now, and it's this chimp that's there and it screams the loudest, and it needs the most attention often, but it's the thing that's saying, relax and restore your energy. It's saying, don't do that thing over there. That seems like hard work. It's like, eat those sweets and those cookies over there because they're delicious and they've got loads of calories that you might need for later, because what if we end up spending days without finding food? Be appreciative that there is this chimp there that's constantly going to be screaming at you and is going to be trying to encourage you to not necessarily make the right choices in our modern world.
Mm-hmm.
And that the human that comes through, the real part of us that makes us who we are, that's the part that's going to help to measure it and level it and make choices about who we are, what we really care about. Do we want to be living a healthy life? Do we want to be around for many years to come for our grandchildren and all of those things? So taking that time to reflect and think about your values and your purpose and what you're here for, and being kind to yourself when sometimes that chimp wins out. I think that's the way I've started to come to terms with it, that we won't be perfect, but if we've struggled with the chimp being too loud, how do we help to quieten it down? How do we help to make some choices to live a better life? So that's something that if people recognize that they've been living through their chimp for many years, just take some time, reflect, what is it that you really want to do, and start to make some small changes in your life that gradually can compound over many years into becoming a very health-focused and a very different person that's essentially the human.
Yeah. Talk to your chimp. Yeah. Ask a chimp what it's doing, why it's doing, and say thank you for keeping you alive.
Yeah.
And have a good, friendly relationship, a genuinely appreciative relationship with your chimp. Yeah. If you see the chimp as the second-class citizen in your head, you'll have other problems.
They'll fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll fight. Well, what does better never ends mean to you? It's my favourite question, because it's all about the podcast. What does better never ends mean to you in your life?
I was thinking about this last night. I was thinking, how do I deal with that? And I thought, well, better never ends for me is about it's a little bit on the striving side of things. It's about continual change and pushing and getting something else. And I think I lived a fair bit of my life with that as the dominant feature. What I'm trying to do is to find the balance for that, and I suppose you could kind of say that that's half the life philosophy. And so I was trying to find some good words that didn't sound too existential, and I thought being present in the present, then better never ends.
Yeah, it's that's lovely, because after a couple of years of it being the thing that really did strive me on in my learning and my development, I did start to have some doubts about, hang on a minute, that doesn't necessarily always lead to positivity. And actually a conversation I had with psychologist Dr. Martin Turner, we covered this in depth about what are the problems with the concept of better never ends. And it's like, this constant striving. And there was an acceptance that provided provided there is this freedom to not necessarily mean just one thing, is that there's this freedom to choose what is the thing that you want to improve on. Yeah. So you've almost added a really lovely addition there, an addendum to it of, I really like that, being present in the present and then. Yeah. Very good. So it means your choices are coming from not through worrying about the future or being frustrated with the past. It's purely on the present moment and choice that's
so it's like learn from the past rather than regret, worry about, be in the past. Be conscious of what you want to bring about in this world, but then focus on the present.
I love that. Finally, how does someone find you if someone's interested by your conversation today and they want to find out a bit more about you and contact you?
I've got a website, drstevejames.com, so Dr. Steve James. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. People who want to look at doing a health program can book an appointment with me or email me through the website. Also on Instagram, handle Dr. Steve James.
Thanks so much. Been lovely to talk to you today.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Pleasure to chat.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Better, provider of health, wellness and performance services based in central London. You can book in for face-to-face services at either of our 2 clinics, one in Soho and one in the city. You can also follow us on Instagram at Better Never Ends, or head over to our website for more information about the clinics or the podcast at www.betterneverends.com. And of course, if you want to send us an email with any feedback, questions or suggestions for future episodes, then email us on podcast@betterneverends.com. And finally, thanks to Brian Long for editing the show. Without him, it's absolutely no doubt in my mind that these would never have seen the light of day. And it will allow this podcast to continue on for as long as I'll keep recording them. So thanks very much, Brian.